desire to be different, the enthusiastic way I approached life, and my creativity in solving problems were still causing me to be not quite acceptable. Somehow I always managed to find and befriend people who felt it was their duty to correct my behavior, my sense of humor, my responses. They wanted me to meet their needs, to direct my energies toward them in such a way that they felt fulfilled. The problem was getting larger and harder to surmount. My family wanted and needed me to be one way, my friends and acquaintances another. I was too busy trying to be accepted to see that I had no clear image of myself. Now, as I faced Spray, I felt as if she was probing deeply into the center of my being, of my essence. I could actually feel her seeking out the inner me, the one I had hidden even from myself. As the probing intensified, I began to sense an inner burst of emotion, as if she had touched a deeply buried button, pressed it, and then released the contents of my most inner self for her to examine. She knew me, whatever that might have meant. Somehow, she had sought, found, and touched this self, this soul or spirit I'd concealed over all those years. For the first time in my life, I felt a quiet affirmation that I was just fine with her, warts and all. Of this I was sure, am sure, will always be sure. This animal, by taking a moment to look at me, looked into me. I could feel it. A sensation of thousands of tiny bubbles whirled around inside my brain and my being, bounced off my consciousness, and spun through the core of my body. I'll never know what she did or how she did it, but she touched and freed the person that lay encrusted beneath all that guarded self. This moment was so intense for me that even though I'd since met and worked with countless dolphins, the encounter stays in my mind, fresh as the day that it first happened. I only have to close my eyes for it to return intact, thrilling and wondrous. I never sought to repeat that experience, and in fact, I never have. When I left the pool that first day, I had no way of knowing I was taking the first steps toward breaking the barriers of dolphin-human communication. I only knew that I'd touched and been touched by an experience too large for me to comprehend. It was a drug, and I was to become a willing addict. I wanted at all costs to pursue further what had just happened. I needed it. My soul needed it, and most of all my mind needed it. It wasn't the emotional jolt I wanted to examine, rather the fact that this animal had the ability, the capacity, even the desire to perform such feats of magic. I would do whatever I had to do to continue to learn from my watery teachers, learn how to behave correctly, how to interact with different species of dolphins, both captive and wild, how to create a mindset that would dissolve the distance that had held the two species apart since we shared the planet together. Most importantly, I would go on to find a way to use what I'd learned to improve the condition of other humans. At that first meeting, I had no idea how this information would enable me to eventually free autistic children to communicate with those who cared for them and about them. In that first contact with Spray, I had an all-too-brief glimpse into a mind and a form of socialization that were more ancient than humankind's. The inner knowledge that this even existed in some form on the planet was what I had unknowingly sought all my life. A community built upon basic social and survival needs, primitive at its core, complex in its creation, with rules to be revealed and used to help humans. It was a totally unexpected benefit of my original purpose for having begun this project. All I had hoped to do was to find a way to expand the use of the brain as a trainable muscle, perhaps to learn how to do this from these remarkable marine mammals. What I was to eventually uncover was far ahead of my original theories. In fact, by the end of that first session with Spray and her tank mate Scotty, I had vowed to put aside any and all theories and just try to learn whatever it was that these dolphins felt I needed to learn. I had expected nothing, looked for nothing, when I first slid into the pool. The shock of Spray's intellect never let up throughout the entire session. More than through her movements and her chattering, she conveyed her intentions and questions through her eyes. Once she had settled upon my acceptability, she moved on to the next level of interaction. I became aware of a subtle change as I saw her right eye narrow and intensify in its purpose. Her unspoken appraisal seemed to indicate that she'd been rating me on a scale unknown to me but important to dolphins. Her continued stare and gentle high-pitched runs of sonar sound seemed to say that I'd been accepted. It was as simple and easy as that. I suddenly understood that all I had to do was be me. There was no rating as to whether or not I was a good or bad person. I was me. And for her and for Scotty, that was enough. In that microsecond, I became aware of yet another change. Spray seemed to indicate her willingness to adopt the role of being my teacher, and I hoped I would be able to live up to her faith in my ability to learn from her. I had never experienced such a sense of vibrancy, of importance to what I was learning and might be taught, and I dearly wanted to be able to take advantage of what she was offering me. She moved away with a backward glance in my direction, then turned and slid toward me, insinuated her broad gray flank across my extended palm, and pressed her flesh to my thick glove. The invitation to accompany her was unmistakable. Perhaps there was hope for me yet. If I could correctly assign her values to her movements, then I might be a student she would want to continue to work with. Through her acceptance, my life took a 90-degree turn, and I was forever to become impassioned, imprisoned by the promises that lay behind her eyelock. How did I come to be in a pool of March-chilled water with Scotty and Spray, two dolphins, two animals that were clearly far more than I had bargained for? For all the years I'd spent preparing myself, I was totally unprepared for this moment. A product of the late 50s and early 60s, I had been taught by my parents to respect authority, to follow the rules, to carry on the heritage and tradition of a strong German Jewish-American past, which allotted a certain percentage of altruistic return to their fellow man. My desire to question and learn was held in check by my need to be loved and cared about. It was an uneasy truce, for me, a no-win situation. I was taught to ask few, if any, questions, to do as I was told and taught, to explore no further than whatever it took to protect what was already mine. By the time I was 19, it had become so bad that although I knew how to be admitted into college, I only knew that you could get out through graduating or flunking out. I hated the too large university I'd entered, and so set about failing every course I could. It was only afterward that I learned about being able to transfer to another school. I still shake my head in amazement at how ingenuous I'd been. Like the animal who gnaws off its leg to escape a trap, I did what I thought was the correct thing to do to get away from that hated school. But I eventually learned not only how to survive and prevail, but how to ask probing questions which would open the world around me and to me. I didn't have to go the course alone. I could learn from others. And this change in approach grew alongside my research. I'd been a school teacher, a wife, a mother. I'd been active in the library of my small, cozy Connecticut town, a singer in the local amateur chorus, a baker of pies and sugary delights which brought out the child in even the most adult person, eventually a tough competitor in the local state fair, and the winner of over 150 ribbons, most of them blue. But as if in a dream, after that first encounter in Cape Cod, I would put that life aside. I knew I couldn't do it all, and what I wanted most was to collect the clues and solve the mystery of these remarkable animals. Since my teens, I had loved to work crossword puzzles.